To start off our second day, we have a speaker whom, for the service learning community, should not be a stranger to anybody. Okay, so our speaker for the second day is Professor Andrew Furco. And I believe that the service learning community is very familiar with him. But in any case, let me introduce. Professor Andrew Furco is a professor of higher education at the University of Minnesota, where he is also director of the International Center for Research on Community Engagement. And at the University of Minnesota, he also served as the associate vice president for public engagement for 14 years, from 2008 to 2021, where he was leading the university's agenda to institutionalize community engagement across the institution's research, teaching, and public service activities. Prior to arriving in Minnesota, Professor Furco worked for 17 years at the University of California, Berkeley as the founding director of the Service Learning Research and Development Center and as a faculty member in the Graduate School of Education. Professor Furco is very active in research as well as services to the community, and his scholarly work focuses on examining the role of service learning and community engagement practices in primary, secondary, and higher education systems in the U.S. and abroad. He has led more than 30 studies focused on issues pertaining to the impacts, implementation, and institutionalization of community engagement practice. He has consulted with more than 100 universities in more than 30 countries on issues pertaining to the advancement and institutionalization of community engagement, service learning, and community engaged scholarship. And I think, we at Hong Kong Poly U can attest to the fact that Dr. Furco is one of the most inclusive, friendliest, and most helpful people in the community that we can think of. So without further ado, let us give the time to Professor Furco. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Grace, for that very gracious introduction. Good day, everyone. It's really wonderful to have this opportunity to be with you all, albeit virtually and not in person. I truly miss the opportunity miss the opportunity to be in Hong Kong with all of you who are participating in person and not be able to visit with my wonderful colleagues and friends at PolyU. Thank you, Grace and Kenneth and Renee and the entire PolyU team for organizing this wonderful conference. As has been shared in this conference session so far, service learning and, as you know, community engagement service learning continue to be featured more prominently in the work of higher education across the globe. And we're seeing this attention being given to the work as more investments are being made in this work. There's a growing centrality of service learning in the broader community engagement efforts designed to further university's social responsibility and service to the public good. And in many ways, attention to serving and advancing the public good has really become one of the most critical issues in higher education today as we look at all the different policy reports that are out there. And I think in education writ large, faces a myriad of challenges, from quickly evolving student demographic changes in enrollments and in diversity, to the emergence of new paradigms of scholarship that are really, I would say, counter-normative and are challenging some of the more traditional ways of doing research and teaching, to increased disciplinarity, and to the growing external pressures for reform from governments, policymakers, parents, students, even increased competition in rankings. Just a few minutes ago, the U.S. News and World Report, some of you are familiar with that, which is a ranking in the United States. Harvard and Yale just removed themselves from those rankings. And so because of all the competition that happens, and when they're not ranked, number one and number two, they have concerns over the rankings. So there are many factors that are coming to bear on higher education right now that are really forcing us to take a look at how we do business. And more institutions of higher education across the globe are jumping on the service learning and community engagement bandwagon. working to become more socially responsible, more engaged institutions. And in many regards, such work has now become the thing to do, given that universities' connection to the real world is a hot topic globally, and is evidenced by the many educational policy reports, as I mentioned, that speak to the importance of university social responsibility and critical to how we are critical to the future of our globe. So I really appreciate this conference and the opportunity to share some words with you today. We are seeing increasingly issues around the incorporation of things like the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN as part of our institutional priorities. We're seeing increased investments in senior administrative positions to lead university community engagement, social responsibility efforts, increased number of service learning courses, community engagement centers on campuses, all to support this work, and many other factors. So there is this global phenomenon that's happening that I think is bringing many institutions to community engagement and to service learning. If an institution wishes to be considered as one that is innovative, cutting edge, keeping up with the times, then it must show its commitment today to serving society and the greater public good. And almost every higher education institution's strategic plan now includes some specific language about elevating and expanding partnerships between the university and the community. And such work is now important, not just to enhance an institution's academic priorities, but it's also important for an institution's image. Just look at university websites in any country. I encourage you to do this. And we find a commitment to solving the world's grand challenges through the institution's research and discovery efforts, a commitment to teaching that in ways that engage students in real world experiences, that engage students to prepare them for the world and their roles in society, and the ways in which discoveries that are done in universities and other work of the university benefits the local region and the broader society. So these things are very prominent now in universities, and they're part of the institutional image. And so those of us, I think, who are champions of community engagement and service learning and social responsibility in higher education might say that, hey, this is great to see engaged university movement take hold this way. When I started out in this work 30 plus years ago, I mean, there was very little conversation about this. And now we're seeing this movement, this visibility, and to see this elevation of social responsibility goals and the growing interest in adopting community engagement and service learning practices. And so in many ways, this is a positive trend, and it's leading to many positive outcomes for higher education institutions community. However, what I would like to caution us is that we should be really attentive to not letting our work in community engagement suffer the fate of many, many, many other reform efforts that have lacked staying power. Because once they became popular and the large majority of institutions adopted them, the efforts lost their value proposition. They became things universities did to keep up with their peers, not necessarily work that they were genuinely interested in, but felt they had to do because everyone does the work. So we really run the risk of losing sight of the core reasons as to why we do community engagement work, why this work is important, not just for our institution, but for the community partners, for our community partners as well. And this is especially true when the value proposition of social responsibility and community engagement shifts from a focus on serving mutual benefits and providing mutual benefits to one that is more about the institution's image. That is, doing it because it makes the institution look good, promotes the institutional brand, it is keeping up with the peers, and it's helping the university rankings. So and we see this in some cases, there is great promotion of university community engagement in the institutional mission, the strategic plans, the websites, the promotional materials, the newsletters. But when we dig deep into the practices of the institution, we find only superficial attention to the community engagement agenda. And this superficiality not only deters the full advancement and institutionalization of community engagement and the fulfillment of an institutional commitment to social responsibility, but it can do much harm to community partners and to the institution's ultimate reputation with the community. So to be a fully and truly engaged university, there are particular characteristics that are present that demonstrate how community engaged practices are seen as a strategy for furthering institutional priorities. And there is focused attention on elevating the centrality of community engagement in fulfilling that academic mission. And at conferences like this, we often focus on those best practices, those exemplars, those effective approaches to conducting and advancing community engagement practices. And sharing and showcasing these successful examples are really important. I'm glad we do that. But what I would like to do in this presentation, the short time we have together, is to share some of the ineffective practices that we need to be attentive to as we advance service learning and community engagement that can get in the way of furthering the institutionalization of this work and really create its demise in the long run, as we've seen with other reform efforts. So the title of my presentation is Why University Social Responsibility Initiatives Fail. Ineffective approaches to institutionalizing social responsibility, service learning, community engagement. So I'm going to go through these very quickly, because I do want to have your questions and your comments. You know, many of these ineffective practices or issues are not necessarily visible, easily discernible. Most are not tangible, they're very intangible, and they can escape us if we're not attentive to them. And if we're not attentive to them, they can undermine our efforts to fully embed them and fully become a truly engaged institution. So in particular, there are 7 issues that stand out as ineffective practices in advancing social responsibility and community engagement. And along with drawing from some of the literature pertaining to issues of community engagement, I also draw on my own experiences in studying institutionalization of community engagement service learning over the years, also from opportunities I've had to work with community engagement across a broad range of institutions, broad different types of institutions, and also with the work and experiences and lessons learned from advancing this work at my own institution. And as I reflect on all of these experiences, I really think that through these societal issues that we're facing, pandemics, societal upheavals, leadership changes, many other institutional changes that we are seeing, turnover, there are those institutions who have failed in this work. And I really see these 7 factors as being some of the reasons why that the engagement work just stopped or ended or really was diminished substantially. And so before I launch into these 7 factors, I want to say that it's important to qualify what I'm talking about when I say community engagement from the perspective that I'm offering here with these 7 factors. Of course, as we know, there are many different types of community engagement work that we do when we connect with external entities, with business and industries, nonprofits, schools, relationships with alumni, relationships with governmental agencies, local town gown issues, etc. Concerts we offer, museums, all that can be qualified as community engaged work. But what I'm talking about specifically is the work that happens in regards to the work of our faculty and our students and our academic units. This is about the work that is an advancement of our mission in terms of mission fulfillment in terms of research, teaching, and service. So the work we do around community engaged research, the community engaged teaching, community engaged service aspects, the academic aspects of the university's community engagement work. So I just wanted to qualify that. So what are these 7 factors? Well, I would say the first factor that can, an ineffective practice, I would say, that can lead to challenges in furthering the institutionalization of community engagement and can really hinder the development of an engaged university is when community engagement is cast and is seen as a separate mission of the institution, rather than an integral part of all aspects of the mission. And as more institutions are adopting community engagement agendas, one of the things we are seeing is this casting of community engagement as a separate item in institutional strategic plans. So what do I mean by this? So to exemplify this, I want to highlight the language of a strategic plan of a university that shall remain nameless. And the plan reads as follows, quote, "The university's strategic priorities guide our project." Guide our progress, excuse me. Our 5 strategic priorities: boundless access, educational value, thought leadership, community engagement, and reputational excellence, are fueled by our mission and values, end quote. So these are the things that this institution says are their strategic priorities. Boundless access refers to increasing student access and diversity at the institution. Educational value refers to incorporating and delivering dynamic, innovative curricular, co-curricular experiences. Thought leadership refers to conducting research that produces new discoveries that address societal challenges. Community engagement, focus on building partnerships with communities, and reputational excellence, well, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So in this case, community engagement is seen as a separate strategic priority to be achieved alongside of a set of other priorities. And we see this in a lot of strategic plans. It is understandable that we would want to give attention to community engagement by giving it its own item, its own place in the strategic plan. And on face value, we normally see this, that's great. Look, we're centering and we're looking at community engagement here. And we can congratulate the institution for wanting to do that. However, in reality, what this has often led to, I would say, is to transform community engagement into what that has done is it has transformed community engagement into a goal rather than incorporate community engagement as a strategy. And it perhaps ultimately unintentionally detaches and separates community engagement from other strategic priorities at the institution. What the research on institutionalizing community engagement tells us about embedding community engagement into the ethos of the institution, it needs to have a demonstrated purpose and value across a broad range of institutional priorities. The end goal is not to do community engagement or service learning, but rather to see community engagement as service and service learning as a strategy to accomplish the other important institutional priorities, to embed it into those institutional priorities. That's ultimately what's going to help community engagement become institutionalized. So in the case I shared, an indication of engaged university would be one that would see community engagement as a way to increase greater student access, as a way to deliver that dynamic and innovative curricular and co-curricular experiences, as a way to conduct that research that produces new discoveries, as a way to enhance the institution's reputation. So community engagement should be embedded into those priorities, not separated from. And because what happens is when we separate out community engagement as a separate strategic goal, what happens is some priorities get more attention than others. Not all priorities are equal. And when it comes to community engagement, unfortunately, evidence shows that it tends to rank lower among all the priorities, strategic priorities, and then therefore ultimately gets less attention and less of investments, when compared to other things like research priorities and teaching priorities. So in one sense, we're putting community engagement up there as a strategic goal to make us look good as an institution. But ultimately, by separating out, we're actually undermining its capacity to be institutionalized. So some institutions have done a great job with this. I point to strategic goals that the University of Alabama, one of our institutions in the United States, has done. And they have several goals. And two of them, they have 4 goals. 2 of them look something like this. One goal is to be a premier undergraduate and graduate education offers global perspective, categorized by outstanding teaching, high quality scholarship, distinctive curricular and co-curricular programs. Under there, they have a set of bullet points. One of the bullet points is expand transformational education experience through community service, global outreach, and innovative study abroad opportunities. Community engagement as a goal, as a strategy to achieve the goal. A second bullet is enhance co-curricular activities that encourage collaboration among students, faculty, staff, and the community. Community engagement as a means to achieve the goal. Another goal they have is to increase the university's productivity and innovation in research, scholarship, creative activities that impact economic, societal development. One of the bullets under that goal, cultivate, support, sponsor, conduct, community, engage research. Community engagement as a strategy. This institution is more likely to embed and become a more engaged university, and over time won't lose its momentum because it's embedded in a series of the strategic priorities. So the first ineffective practice is to separate out community engagement as a strategic goal. A second one is, quick wins are important to make the case. But we really need to think about the long-term view of how service learning community engagement will be incorporated into the various aspects of the community of the institution's work. It's important to remember that the activities themselves do not create or build an engaged university. So by doing service learning, we don't become an engaged university. Rather, there needs to be attentiveness to the institutional policies, the structures, the culture of the institution, to provide the spaces and the opportunities for community engagement to thrive. This requires often making profound changes that require moving beyond doing business as usual. And building an engaged university takes more than just tinkering with the institution, but it requires institutional transformation in fundamental aspects of the institution's academic work, such as the nature of pedagogy and how faculty teach, ways student learning is assessed, epistemological shifts in how knowledge is created and shared, incorporation of new approaches and methodologies of research, culture shifts, who qualifies as an expert, who is a peer. When we do community engaged work, the peers are not just people in our discipline, people in the community as well. These are fundamental shifts and changes, and these do not happen overnight. And so they require this intentional, ongoing attention to manifest. And one of the questions I often ask institutional leaders when I visit institutions, and they ask me, about strengthening their institution's social responsibility, community engagement effort. And one of the questions I ask is, what do you think the institution will look like to have community engagement or service learning fully institutionalized? What will be different? What will the institution look like? And the responses that are shared will often be indicative of how central community engagement really is for the institution, and how far and how well the community engagement institutionalization process is likely to go. So, for example, institutions that have a weaker, and I would say likely shorter-lived community engagement agenda, we are more likely to hear things such as these, and these are actual quotes. Quote, we plan to have all of our students engage in at least one service learning experience prior to graduation. Very common, by the way. Another quote, the goal is to double the number of partnerships with communities over the next 3 years. Another quote, the university has developed professional development opportunities for faculty to build their capacity to conduct community partnership activities. Now, these are all very worthy and important activities, and we need to do them to advance our work. And they do help advance the institutionalization, service learning, community engagement to build a more engaged university. And they are focused on addressing prevalence and the depth of the practice and expanding that critical mass of students and faculty and units that are engaged in the work. However, in contrast, when at institutions that have made really big strides in advancing their engagement work, we hear responses that sound more like this. And listen to see if you can hear some of the different nuances in how they respond. So these are institutions that are more likely to sustain this work and made greater strides. Quote, our faculty reward system was restructured to give value to scholarship conducted in partnership with community members. Another quote, as part of their annual budgets, each college and school identifies the action steps they take towards institutionalized community-based research, scholarship, and teaching. Another quote, we have a university-wide committee that proposes and considers new institutional policies that can support the further development of civic and community engagement. I don't know if you heard some differences there, but as these examples suggest, at institutions that are more successful in advancing social responsibility and community engagement efforts, there's often a greater focus on developing and revising or refining policy issues. When the focus remains on the programs, on the community engagement of service learning programs and practices, and there is too little emphasis or too little attention to the policy issues, the community engagement agenda can remain weak. And in some cases, the existing policies can make it very difficult for community engagement work to take hold and to thrive. So if promotion tenure policies are not addressed, if faculty are not rewarded for this work, or if issues of liability are not addressed. So for example, who's responsible when a student gets hurt during a service learning project? Or if the issue of intellectual property is not addressed. So we're conducting this co-constructed work between faculty members or students and community partners. Who owns the work intellectually? What's the intellectually property issues that come into play? When some of these issues are not addressed and policies are not clear about them, they could really deter community engagement from advancing. They can make community engagement work really challenging to the point where people will just not participate. So when we see language around advancing this work focused only on programmatic things and not on policy, we feel that there's a tendency to probably undermine our own efforts. So being attentive to those policies become really, really essential. So an ineffective practice is to only focus on the practice and on the policies. A third one is that one of the most interesting things in this field of engagement is how much of the work is based on the work of champions. Individuals, groups of individuals who take on leadership roles to advance the institution's community engagement agenda. Whether it be a faculty member who speaks up and starts to support the work, or a senior administrator who makes community engagement their signature priority, or a group of students who coordinate activities, establish a program. We often find on campuses these champions of community engagement, service learning, who raise that banner for the work and who become the movers, the shakers in building engaged institutions. And also interesting and somewhat concerning, I would say, in regard to institutionalized community engagement and service learning is that when these champions leave the institution or they move on, leave their position, the effort often tends to suffer meaning community engagement often gets weakened and sometimes goes away altogether. And this might be because the effort is associated strongly with the individual who might move on, and therefore they say, well, that was so-and-so's program or so-and-so's agenda. Or it might be because there's no one who is interested or prepared to pick up where the champion or champions left off. But another issue is that there's a lot of institutional memory that goes with those champions, which can lead to institutional paralysis on what to do next, or a sense of needing to start over when a new group comes in to move the agenda forward. So we are seeing this more and more these days with very high turnover and interest rates, and turnover with rates of interest within academia as more universities want to advance this work. So keeping the momentum and going through these periods of change become really, really important. So new leaders who come on board with new agendas that pivot too much may really undermine this effort. That's why it's really important for institutions to have action plans that are codified, that are written. It's important to also develop timelines of what has happened over the last 10, 15, 20, 25 years to build the programs. It's important for those who come to the university who are new, maybe even to the institution, to understand what has gone into building that effort so they can build on it. When there's a lack of that institutional memories, there's a tendency to start anew, to repeat things that have been done, to move in new directions, really foregoing a lot of what has been built. So institutions that are able to really progress and move forward have that institutional memory codified, have those plans codified. I'm going to move through the last ones very quickly here. Lofty goals and unrealistic expectations is something that really affects our ability to move forward. We set up very, very lofty goals. Things like we're going to reduce poverty, we're going to reduce homelessness, we're going to increase literacy, we're going to do all of these amazing things. It's interesting to watch grants for service learning community engagement and the goals that we set out. And we're going to do it in 15 weeks over 40-hour service learning experience. Right? If that would happen, we'd all be doing service learning and community engagement. So part of, I think, our own undermining is that we set these very, very lofty goals that we can't live up to and never will. And I think it's very important to separate our aspirational goals with establishing very realistic goals. I know that we set these goals often because we have to justify, and we have to justify the work that we do. But it's really important that we keep them focused on the things we can accomplish and that we can measure. And so that we can continue to have that buy-in and the trust that we actually can achieve those goals. Number 5, focusing too much on projects and not on partnerships. Too many projects come and go. Partners get frustrated that things start and stop. We lose trust with them, and they do not want to participate. When we start building partnerships with them to say, here are some mutual goals, we want to develop a set of projects that can be part of the larger set of goals. Those projects can come and go, but the partnership remains. So thinking about the unit of analysis as a partnership rather than projects. Institutions that only focus on projects and are not thinking about partnership often see their work diminish over time as partners start to say, you know, we've done this, it's too much, we cannot sustain this kind of start and stop activity. Number 6, ensuring that there's vertical and horizontal alignment. What's lacking sometimes is not knowing what is happening across the institution. There's a lack of horizontal alignment, and that impacts the community where different aspects and different units at the institution are coming at the institution, at the community. And it seems like we're very disorganized in our work. That's another way for community to step away. And it also creates duplication of efforts, turf battles, competition for funding, a lot of things that can get in the way and diminish that work. So thinking strategically about a horizontal alignment is important, and also that vertical alignment of being able to have those policies match the practices I talked about earlier. There's usually, when there's a lack of someone who is attentive or a group that's attentive to that, we tend to see a diminution in community engagement advancement. So it's very important to think about who is doing that vertical and horizontal alignment. And the last point I want to make, and this I think is the most important one and has to do with lack of authenticity. As universities are increasingly adopting community engagement because it's become popular, there are many external pressures, as I mentioned earlier. And while it's great to see this advancement of community engagement across higher education, a consequence is that some institutions are adopting this work to beef up their public image, to make the university look good, to be in step with other institutions, and are really losing sight of the social responsibility and the values on which this work is built on. Therefore, what can be missing from the work is authenticity. A lack of authenticity in working reciprocally with partners, a lack of authenticity to build trust with communities, a lack of authenticity and genuineness in honoring and appreciating the knowledge and expertise that reside in the community. And so in essence, the value of why we do the work in regard to community social responsibility can be lost. And this can be really detrimental to an institution's community engagement agenda, and community members know it when we are not authentic in our work. This affects the trust and the ability to sustain our community partnerships in meaningful ways. And retain that authenticity throughout is essential to build a sustained agenda. And once we lose that trust with community, it's very difficult to build it back. So I hope we'll be attentive to these ineffective practices so we don't do them. And I hope that we can continue to avoid them so that we can continue to build these engagement agendas towards more fully institutionalizing service learning and community engagement to fulfill our social responsibility goals and to advance our research, teaching, and service missions through community engagement. Thank you so much for your attention. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Professor Furco. That was, as always, Andy's talk is very thought-provoking and very, very insightful through so many years of experience. Actually, when you were talking about institutional memory, what I was thinking was that, you know, Andy's insight and memory is something that we need to codify, like totally, because of all of that wisdom that he's gathered. Before I take questions from the audience, and also if the audience online has any questions, please put them into the chat box as well. Just a couple of responses was just a couple of thoughts that came to my own mind was that I'd like to share is when Andy talked about institutional memory, that's something that recently Dr. Stephen Chan, the founding head of the Office of Service Learning here at PolyU, and I were we started thinking about, oh, you know, maybe we should write up the story of service learning at PolyU, you know. And when we were doing that, and when Stephen was going through, you know, and we started digging up all sorts of things like Senate papers, you know, meeting notes and everything, we found there was so much that we forgot. And recently I read the drafts, and there were incidents that when I looked, I was like, oh my God, you know, like that was something that I learned so much from, but I had completely forgotten that incident with, you know, with the rush of everything that came to mind, right? You know, that everything has been happening. And especially in this day and age, you know, as Andy so rightly pointed out, there is so much turnover. I mean, one of the things that we are seeing on our campus at PolyU alone is that after 2.5 years of COVID, our students have forgotten what it means to do service learning abroad. This is something that we are seeing. I mean, you would not think that something that impactful as that could be forgotten amongst the student body. But it turns out that students do not know anymore what it means to do service learning abroad. And recently, when we were trying to recruit students, we sent out, you know, when we were registering students for our service learning programs, with overseas projects in the summer, we found the students had no idea what that meant. How long it would be, whatever, and we are having to rebuild that student institutional memory all over again. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing that hit me was the authenticity. And when we are not authentic, the community partners know. But another thing as well that I have found in my own experience, the students are smarter than we think. When our efforts are not authentic, the students know. The students know when they are asked to put on a show. I think a lot of us here as teachers would know that, can attest to that. When the students know that their efforts are out there to quote unquote put on a show, they know, right? And then sooner or later, that actually gets passed along to students, and they see, service learning as something that just means going through the motions. And that's not good for anybody. So anyway, those are just my own personal responses. So let me see whether or not there are any responses or questions from the audience, either from the floor or from our online audience. Stephen, we need that mic to come over. Yeah, a mic is coming over.
Thank you so much. I think to some extent, what you said affirm some of the things that we believe in. But I would like to seek your wisdom in how do you actually do it. We try very hard to convince our management that service learning is not just an end to itself, even though it does achieve great things, that it helps to achieve other objectives of the university. But from your experience, what kind of strategies would be effective with management in trying to convincing them that this is actually the case? We believe in it, but how do we convince them?
That's a great question, Stephen, and that's an ongoing challenge. It's not always easy, and not everyone can be convinced. I think the approach that I've used that has been somewhat successful is that I've never really talked about community engagement and service learning. So when I talk with faculty or deans or department chairs, I would talk about quality teaching and what that means. Actively engaging students in the learning process, connecting contextualized learning, constructivist kinds of practices, et cetera. And then say, what kinds of quality practices, instructional practices are being incorporated in your discipline. And then here's service learning as one potential. And so introducing it that way. We've also talked about importance of broader impacts of our research and how to achieve that. And one way is to actually talk with the communities and engage with the communities that we're trying to impact. So I don't really start with the community engagement service learning conversation. I start with what are these things that we're trying to achieve, these priorities, and then say, oh, and here's one way we might accomplish that. And it's really nudging people along. And for some, it's just not going to be the thing that they want to do. I also think the external pressures that a number of us are feeling, certainly in my institution, we have felt that in terms of saying, what is the institution doing for society? What is our students demanding? More community engaged opportunities, new faculty are coming saying, I want to do community engaged research. Will I be rewarded for that work here? So there's these other pressures that have made a difference as well. But there's no magic bullet in convincing people.
Thank you so much. Andy, there's one question from the online audience. So Father George Tadato from Salesian Colleges in India. Thanks for the talk, Andrew. It was very grounded. The point of authenticity is what struck me too. As to you, at what point do you think a long-term engagement of an institution should go public?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is it public in terms of marketing it as something that the institution does? Is that the question?
Not sure. Father
Maybe.
George, could you elaborate on that? Well, we are waiting
So
on that. In the interest of time, yeah, Andy, would you like to take a stab at answering that? Yeah.
yeah, sure. So I think part of it is that we have to serve the public. That's part of our tripartite mission of research, teaching, and public service. The question more is about how we tout this work and what it is that we really are, the underlying intentions as to why we promote it and why we want to talk about it. Are we genuinely interested in having community impact? Are we genuinely interested in really working in mutual beneficial ways of honoring community knowledge and expertise, of co-constructing work? Or are we doing it because it's a way of saying, look at the wonderful work we're doing for society. We're a great institution. Look how marvelous we are. And it's more for promotional reasons, for image and for branding. And we see that now more and more in many institutions that promote all these wonderful community engagement things. But when you dig deep, they're not really investing and they're not really promoting the work in those genuine ways that we talked about. So I think the time to go public with it is when we're really doing it for genuine purposes. And we have to really be careful how we market this. So for example, I'll give you a very quick example. We, in my own institution, we said, the University of Minnesota is out solving the world's grand challenges, or working in your community to solve your challenges. And I said, could we maybe change that language to the University of Minnesota is working with communities to address societal's grand challenges, right? So it's just the way we present the work and what and how we do it and why we do it, and not losing sight of that value proposition of why we do the work.
Okay, thank you. I would like to take one last question from the floor, that gentleman over there. Andy, can you hear the question?
No,
Maybe,
I cannot.
why don't you come and use this mic?
My name is Dr. Robert Westling, and I'm working at Vinh University in Hanoi.
Hello, Dr. Westling.
And I wanted to ask you, because you brought up so many interesting points about institutions that are committed to service learning on the one hand, but maybe haven't thought it through institutionally. So my question focuses on mandates for students to participate in service learning. And I know that HK PolyU is an example of how to do that right, at least from my perception. But I know that there are many other institutions where they say students must perform 25 hours of service learning in order to graduate, and they're kind of on their own, or sometimes there's a small office that can help them place into an opportunity. What is your general thinking about mandates, and how, for those of us who are responsible for kind of like a vaguely stated institutional priority, which includes a mandate, how can we best navigate that situation so that we deliver the optimal experience both for the university, the community, and our students?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and thank you very much. I would just say in the brief minute, I was just given a 1 minute warning here, brief minute that I have, that the first question I was asked is why? What's the purpose and point of requiring it? If it's to set a certain set of objectives that we want students to achieve, then that service learning experience becomes the strategy for doing that. Then there's a real reason to do it. When it's a matter of saying, well, we want students to have the service learning experience because we think it's just something that's good for them to do and they can do the hours, I find that's not a compelling reason. And it actually becomes something we just tick off without a real clear set of outcomes. So I think it also comes out to a rationale as to why we want to do it, and how it might, and how service learning, to make that direct link of how service learning will help achieve those outcomes for students or for the community, or whatever those intended outcomes will be. And then to monitor it with some quality standards, which is what PolyU does, for example, in the review of the curriculum and the courses. So that's my short answer on that. And it's a big debate in the field, and I'm not sure we've reconciled sort of what the best way to approach it, to not require is. That's still an ongoing debate.
Thank you so much, Andy. And I think are we out of time? Okay, yeah, I'm so sorry. We are out of time. But thank you so much again, Andy. Please, everybody, let's give Andy a big hand. And yeah,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andy. So